a small child that's experienced atrocities.
Yeah.
And is it their karma? Is it the parents' karma? Did the child choose these parents? It's all very confusing.
Oh, it would be very confusing. Okay.
Not that I'm trying to share it with clients.
No, I understand, of course. Question is a therapist who deals with a lot of families, and you can see adults coming in, but they're bringing in a child who's caught in something. So whose karma is it? Yeah, just give me a second here. This is where the whole question of karma gets really, really tough. Because we look at children and we think they're innocent. You know, and Master tells this extremely disheartening story of somebody, one of his disciples had a baby and put the baby in his arms for his blessing. So what Master said, I almost dropped the baby because I could see that in a previous lifetime this child had been a murderer. And so, you know, now it's a little seemingly nothing, but the karma's there, the consciousness is there. It's just getting God's chance to start over again. Okay, now I'm not saying that and now this is where it gets really hard, because are you being punished for being bad? Does God have no mercy? I mean, so there is no simple answer to this one, and this is where people leave the path. We never really get on it because it's just too hard to make this divine law, to accept that this is actually the way it is. So we just have to start by just having a few coping strategies and not just my dogmatically saying that it's always your karma and that the baby's not innocent. This also has to do with what I was saying earlier, which is merely because something is profoundly challenging does not mean that it's bad. It could be a reward for a tremendous amount of spiritual growth, that now you're ready to face into the hardest part of your past or your misunderstanding, and that from the beginning you're going to be challenged. Oftentimes when people come to me with very difficult karma that started with conception, you know, it's like, okay, this number was really up in this lifetime. You are not going to take a pass. You are not going to get a few easy years. You were determined that this lifetime is going to be about learning really hard lessons. So why is that a punishment? Why is that not a courageous reward for your capabilities at this point? That it's pleasant, that it, quote, seems unfair, because this is what I was saying a moment ago. Nobody causes your karma, but people participate in your karma. And so they say, when you're in the astral world, when you're not engaged but have some detachment, this presumes a certain amount of awareness, because some people do not wake up in the astral world because they do not believe you can be conscious without a physical brain. As Master said so interestingly, if you've meditated, when death comes, you realize that you can be conscious without a physical brain, and so you can die consciously. If you believe that consciousness itself requires a physical brain, so Master put it in kind of charmingly, when your brain begins to die, you feel obligated to go unconscious. And so you don't really have an awareness. He calls then the astral world is like a gray dream, because you just don't believe you can be conscious, and then you come into a body and you become conscious again. But you only come into a body because you have physical karma. You have karma that can only be worked out on the material plane. You have great misunderstandings about what causes suffering, what causes happiness. You may have made serious mistakes in the past, and the debt has to be balanced. You could be about to be liberated and have piled it all on at the same time. Any one of these things can be true. And unless you have divine vision, you won't know. But the certainty is that that God has not made a mistake. Now, the only way you can come to that certainty is to know thyself. I mean, that's why all of true spiritual understanding has to come from personal experience. When we experience within ourselves that there is a loving divine presence that is in charge of this, and that which appeared to be the worst often turns out to be the best. When I first started taking people to India on pilgrimage, and I mentioned earlier, it was almost all Americans who'd never been out of the Western world. We started in 1986, so the whole huge modernization and financial arising of India really wasn't there. And even though it's still different than New York, it was, you saw poverty in a way that you didn't see it. And it was so interesting to me because people had very, very, very different reactions to being surrounded by beggars who saw that we were Americans and wanted money, to see people sleeping on the street. I was in the Oberoi Grand Hotel in Calcutta, which is a grand hotel, on the 5th floor. And for the week that I was there, I watched the family living on the square of sidewalk that was outside my window. Some people totally freaked out at the sight of what they saw as deprivation. And we literally, some of the rest of us had to walk around them and protect them from the beggars or the merchants and so on. Others were just completely at ease, just chatting with the beggar and, comparing notes and admiring the baby and, just like they just took it in stride. And so over a few trips, I began to wonder, what is the difference? This is what I came to understand. If you yourself were still rebelling against the necessity for suffering as an important teacher, when you saw suffering in others, it was very difficult for you to handle. If you had had the experience of how suffering is a very important teacher and we should not fear it, we should just welcome it, then the sight of suffering in others doesn't mean you don't have a compassionate heart, but you aren't afraid of it, which is a different thing. Your heart breaks. The Master's heart breaks. Swami said to me once, just because I'm calm, he said, you think I don't have deep feelings about things. He said, I'm far more sensitive than, basically what he said, than any of you. Because I not only observe it, I feel it. Imagine being one with all these people. So in your position, or you wouldn't be in the profession without a great deal of empathy, your challenge is to get the God's eye view. Here's a soul who is in a baby's body, but, last lifetime they weren't a baby. When Swami came to visit our school once, one of the children knew he was old because his hair was gray, but his consciousness was just different and she could feel it. And she kept inching closer and closer to him like this. Finally, she's standing right in front of him, looks him right in the eye and says, how old are you anyway? Just like that. And he says, well, let me put it to you this way. He said, when you were an old woman, I was a little boy. She kind of took that for a minute, and then somehow something clicked, and she just went on. That baby's not a baby. You have no idea what that baby is, who he was. He's just a baby now because this is how we get to be the next round. So this is just a simple continuation of whatever it is. And they could have been a great saint who's going to finish their karma. They could be a very confused person who needs to understand the consequences of their own actions. It could be somewhere in between. Any of those things could be true, but there is a full divine consciousness equal to Krishna, to Buddha, to Yogananda, present there, going through what it has to go through to get free. And this is why there's so few of us in this room, because this is a very hard teaching, because it takes away from us all excuses. And, even when we're freaking out because people are suffering, there's two ways to freak out. One is with tremendous compassion, and the other is with fear or rebellion. And so which one are we going to choose? And this is not easy. I've been doing these teachings for decades. This is the hardest one. This is the hardest one. What about the suffering children? It almost always comes that way. What about the suffering children? So what do I say? Oh, they're not innocent. They're really guilty. That's a really, like, that one, trust me, that one does not work. The only one that I have ever found that works is look at it from a perspective of, Sri Yukteswar, Yogananda's guru, in Autobiography of a Yogi, he's presented as being very tough, stern in his discipline, and there are lots of ways that you read after you read that. Master's brother Sananda, one of his children was a man named Hare Krishna Ghosh. Hare Krishna's was older. He's passed now. Yogananda came to America in 1920. He returned to India in 1935 and spent a little more than a year there. He returned once. Hare Krishna Ghosh was 15 years old when Yogananda came back. In 1986, 87, those years when we went to India, Hare Krishna was still living and he talked to us. So Hare Krishna's grandfather, who was Yogananda's father, is that what you would say? Yes. Was a disciple of Lahiri Mahashaya. Sri Yukteswar was a disciple of Lahiri Mahashaya. So as Gurubhais, Sri Yukteswar would often come visit at the house where Hare Krishna was living. Okay, we think, here comes, Sri Yukteswar, hide in the closet, basically. Hare Krishna said Sri Yukteswar was very joyful. He really liked children. He would hide candy in his clothes, and he would play with the children and have them, search for the candy. Whoa, this is not the picture that any of the rest of us have at all. So I tried to reconcile this because, he was a master. He was in a state of infinite joy and perfect love. But Sri Yukteswar fully accepted the inescapability of divine law. The inescapability of divine law. And divine law is what causes suffering, what brings happiness. And the inescapability of divine law is we must learn what causes suffering, what brings happiness, and then discipline, focus, rise, expand until it's effortless for us to live that way. And all of us are always looking for an exception, aren't we? My nephew is an attorney now, but he's an attorney now because he was born an attorney, Some of you may have raised a child like that. And I remember once in confrontation with my sister when he was about 6 or 7, he was trying to negotiate an alternative to the one that she was presenting. And my sister just looked at him and said, "When I speak to you like this, have I ever changed my mind?" And he contemplates that for a little while and says, "No." She says, "It's not going to happen this time either." Right? And we're always trying to negotiate a different alternative, aren't we? And no, it's just not going to happen. And Sri Yukteswar, he wasn't harsh. He just didn't want to waste time pretending that there was another choice. So you can try to find 100 ways to be at peace with the karma of this child. And then you ask the specific question, so I'll finish that. Is it the child's karma, the family karma? You get all of it. This thought. In our community of Ananda village, where I guess we're on about our 3rd generation of raising children, by no means does everyone stay. Most of the children go on and do something else, but we have multiple generations. And parents who are raising children in that context have a marvelous answer when the children get to be teenagers and say, "You're terrible, Mommy, I don't like you. Why are you trying to tell me blah, blah," as teenagers do. And then the mother can say back, "Not my fault, you chose me." It's a great defense. So there was a gentleman, a wonderful man named Brian Powers. He's in the astral world now. And he had no children of his own, but he kind of became the uncle to everybody. So the teenagers, after the mother would say, "You, not my fault, you chose me," they would come to him and say, "I never would have chosen her," just like, and just rebelling against the whole thing. So Brian didn't know what to do. He goes to Swami and says, "What do I say? How do I answer this?" So Swami's answer was interesting. He said, when you're thinking of incarnating, you find a place that has enough elements to help you, but you do not actually choose every detail. There'll be something there that will pull you in. You may come just for your mother. You may come just for your little brother. And that person that you come for has an overlap with the rest of them, and then gradually you get the whole picture. That doesn't mean, however, there's a mistake. That just means there's various intensities of involvement and intensities of magnetism that'll draw you to it. And so you can say and see that the only part of this that really concerns you is this, and the rest of it is the background. It will still affect you because you also get personal karma, you get family karma, you get national karma, you get global karma. And you will be swept up in it, but it will affect you to varying degrees depending on the pattern in your chakras and therefore how much of a match, an energetic match there is. And that's why people in the same family can be very, very different. Or you have multiple siblings and only one or two of them really matter to you because you just don't have karma with the rest of them. So if I were a therapist, which I am not, here's the last part of it, and I mentioned it briefly earlier. You can not only pray, it is beneficial not only to pray for other people, but in a very interesting way, you can pray to them, which is your soul knows what it's doing here. And you can pray to a baby who can't answer you in words, but it does not have a small soul. It's infinite. It's fully present. And you say to the consciousness to consciousness, how can I help you? Why are you here? What are you trying to accomplish? Inspire me to be able to serve you. And you'll be, it's fascinating what comes to your mind. Yeah, it's very, very powerful in a situation like that. Okay? That's usually the question right after what do we do about our chaotic times is why do little children suffer? Yeah, why do little children suffer?
Is there ever a point where it can become selfishness?
Okay. The question about happiness and joy, is there ever a point, if we're meant to experience it, when can it become selfish? Oh yeah, sure. But the point is, here's the point. See, it's not just about being happy, and I try to articulate it very exactly. What causes lasting happiness? See, we have this thing in our mind, we say happy, and that means pleasurable and easy. And we have this idea that life is meant to be pleasurable and easy. And when it's neither pleasurable nor easy, we think something's wrong. And this is the whole discussion, But when you go to university, when you go to boot camp, when you go to the gym, for heaven's sakes, you don't expect it to be pleasurable and easy, except as a means to an end. And so what's happening to our society right now is people have forgotten what the end is. So all they're thinking about is whether it's pleasurable and easy now. And, traditional religion understood this really well. There's heaven and there's hell, there's sin and there's punishment. And it was an attempt to explain to people the difference between I want it and I want it now, and if I get it, I'll feel better, and what it really means to establish a consciousness that will really bring us lasting joy. However, the very nature of lasting happiness requires an expansion of self-definition from limited to ever more inclusive. So true happiness comes when the small self becomes smaller and smaller, And our understanding becomes larger and larger. And so people profoundly misunderstand. Like when you walk away from responsibilities or ways of living that everybody else thinks that you should be following, you're so selfish, you're just following your own interests. But you're not, because what you're doing is you're trying to develop the capacity to truly love, to truly care about others. And, I remember hearing an Olympic athlete talk about his training regime. And he did this, and he did this, and he did this, and this. He said, and I did it every day. I did it on Christmas. I did it on my wedding anniversary. I did that practice on my children's birthday. And you would say, what a, quote, sacrifice. But he didn't see it as a sacrifice. He thought as the natural way to get to a goal. And so people will say you're being selfish because you're not taking care of what they think is the most important thing for you to take care of. But if you are truly in tune with divine law, you will become more and more capable. The story of the Buddha, described in the Edwin Arnold's poem, The Light of Asia. Unfortunately, I can't quote it to you, but it's exquisitely beautiful. It's well worth reading. Basically, the Buddha says, because the Buddha walked away from his beautiful wife and his infant child, and all his responsibilities to be king, to go off and attain enlightenment. And in beautiful poetic terms, it says, everybody will think that I didn't love you. He said, but I loved to his wife, to his sleeping wife when he left. But I loved you most of all. And so I'm going to find the answer, for your sake, so I can bring it back to you. I mean, it's just, oh. And how could that be selfish? You give someone a few years of whatever, or you give them an eternity of bliss. Which one is more selfish? Yeah. That's why it's day to the yogi and night to the worldly man. It just goes opposite. Yeah. Okay. Spiritual aspect.
Thank you on trauma.
So, the question has to do with trauma, which is one of those words that's used a lot, and healing trauma. Okay. When your heart is broken, it's never the same again. It just heals around the crack, and you become different because of that. You're never innocent again because now you know. We all come to that point. Swami used to tell a joke. The little 5-year-old boy says to the 5-year-old girl, "Are you a virgin?" She says, "Not yet." Which is that she doesn't even know the options at that point. It's just, you're innocent. There's the freedom of innocence, which has never been tested. Then we're tested. And then there's the freedom of wisdom, which is completely different. And trauma is one of the ways that we're tested. It's like, can we keep an open heart? Can we believe in God? Do we have faith in ourselves? Do we become cynical? Do we quest after deeper, more satisfying answers? Or do we just crack and stay cracked by contracting? See, this is contractive, expansive. So it's never like it's healed in the sense that it never existed. But what happens is, you see it in a bigger perspective. It's just like, it's the wheel that I was talking about earlier. When you're right here, all you know is just what you can touch. When you move like this and you look back at it, you see what brought you to that point. You see the delusions that you were following that you thought would be solved by this. You see the challenging circumstances that were placed on you, and then you can see the possibility of evolution, transformation, expansion. And I'm wanting to go into the chakras, but it's way too late in the day. So I have to sort of think about how to say this. We hold certain beliefs about reality, and those beliefs are what causes suffering, what causes happiness. I know I'm sounding like a broken record, but that is really the issue. And the chakra system which is the energy body, is the means by which karma is carried. And the jiva moves in and out. It moves in, the energy pattern is always there. It manifests in a physical body, and that energy pattern draws it to a particular body and manifests that particular body because it matches the energy pattern. Your horoscope, interestingly enough, is an external symbol of the internal energy pattern. That's why it can be remarkably accurate of who and what you are. But within each chakra, which represents different levels of understanding, there's something called vrittis, which are whirlpools, the word. Chakra itself means wheel. Because you have one central idea, you have a central point, and then energy is magnetized to that central point until gradually there's a magnetic energy field. Energy comes into us as life force, and we might have an idea of how we're going to use it, but it's literally like a river is flowing to the sea. The river knows its job is to get to the sea, but as it's getting to the sea, a lot of garbage has fallen into, or just big objects have fallen into parts of the river. And so some of the energy gets to the sea, but a great deal of it just spins around this center point. It's captured. And it just keeps spinning because there's a central point that holds it. You know, for example, if your self-worth is based on that you're young, slim, and beautiful, which can happen to women as well as men, I mean, to men as well as women, the opposite way. But if a woman has traded on the fact that she's young, slim, and beautiful, and then that inevitable thing happens where she isn't anymore, the thought form that nobody will love me unless I'm young, slim, and beautiful, you know, it is held there if that's been your life commitment, and energy continues to spin around it, and you're always uncomfortable. And then the next life, in the astral world, you look for the really pretty woman to be your mama, right? Because you have this very strong thought form that it's extremely important to you to be beautiful. If you're an athlete and you lose your ability to be athletic, if you define yourself by the money, then suddenly you don't have any money. The point is there. If you think, as I felt when I was much younger, that if you actually have an intense argument with someone, it is, let me think, the end of the world. So you have a point in which the thing you have to avoid above all is having an argument. And a great deal of your energy spins around the idea of having an argument. If you believe that because of the way I was raised, because of the way my father treated me, because of the fact that I witnessed horrible things in some country during war, because of the fact that I killed people, and you're very committed to happiness and sadness being related to that, then all your energy will continue to spin around that. But when you begin to understand, however you come to understand, that there was a purpose behind what happened, and that my understanding of happiness and suffering was not unreasonable, but it wasn't the last word. This is the word called awareness that I was talking about the other night. You become aware of a reality that you weren't aware of. Then you don't have to work to get out of that trauma. You just see it differently. A woman friend of mine who had an abortion when she was quite young, well, relatively young, before she was 20, got on the spiritual path, began to understand that that was not necessarily the wisest thing to have done. In the context, it made sense to her, but later she felt very badly for it. She felt so badly that she went to Swami Kriyananda. She said, you know, just like confessed that she'd had this abortion, which she now felt so terrible about. Swami's response, oh, that soul reincarnated a long time ago. This was just like, yeah, it didn't get to be your child, but it's gone on. You know, you participated in the karma, but you didn't create the karma. And now that soul has just moved on from it. And what that did was, you see, it took the center point away. And that center point, because of his wisdom and his grace, that center point dissolved. And so one way or another, that's why sometimes when they treat trauma with psychedelics, they have remarkable experiences. Because sometimes that psychedelic, and I'm not an expert on this, I only know this peripherally, but that psychedelic can cause the person to see the whole thing from such a different angle that the center point dissolves of its own. It's like you're walking in the forest and you see a twisted thing in the road and you think it's a snake and you panic and you run away and it's a snake and it's frightening. And you have a very real experience of terror over the snake. Then you actually see that it was a branch. And so it never really happened the way you thought it happened, but your experience was real. Think of it another way. What if a friend of yours, you think your friend has betrayed you, and you're heartbroken and you're angry and you break the friendship and everything is awful, and then later you found out that it was a misunderstanding. They never actually betrayed you. But you experienced the betrayal. But it never actually happened. That's how the masters say this whole thing that we think, where we're being hurt, we're being tortured, and we're being all this suffering, it's not happening the way we think it's happening. And that is the final solution. Now, there's many interim stages, and I am no expert on those. But this is how freedom really comes to us. It's the only way. We have to change our vibration and see something that we weren't aware of before. Worth doing.